Hey, tonight we're diving into a fascinating journey through one of history's darkest yet most transformative periods. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in the pre-dawn darkness of what we would call 40,000 years ago, though such measurements of time mean nothing to you, and the first sensation that grips your consciousness is not the cold morning air seeping through the gaps in the rocky overhang that serves as your shelter, but the gnawing emptiness in your stomach that has been your constant companion for more days than you can count on your fingers, because the concept of numbers beyond what you can physically touch and see remains as foreign to your mind as the idea that the earth beneath your feet is actually a sphere spinning through an endless void, and as you shift your weight on the bed of dried grass and animal skins that cushions your body from the hard stone floor, you feel the familiar ache in your joints that comes from sleeping on surfaces that offer little comfort, though the notion that human beings might someday create soft, elevated sleeping platforms specifically designed for rest and comfort never enters your thoughts, because your entire existence revolves around the immediate challenges of finding food, avoiding predators, and staying warm enough to survive another night in a world that seems designed to kill you at every opportunity. The darkness around you is absolute in a way that modern humans can barely comprehend, because there are no distant city lights bleeding through your shelter, no electronic devices casting their subtle glow, no street lamps or house lights creating the ambient illumination that has banished true darkness from most human experience. And in this complete blackness you rely entirely on your other senses to navigate the familiar space of your shelter, feeling with your hands for the sharp-edged stone tools that you keep within easy reach, listening for any sounds that might indicate the presence of the large predators that hunt during the night and could easily kill and devour you and your family while you sleep, and breathing deeply to detect any changes in the air that might signal danger or opportunity, though you have no understanding of why your nose can distinguish between thousands of different scents or how the tiny particles that create odors actually travel through the air to reach the sensitive tissues inside your nasal passages. Your hands search the darkness until they find the familiar weight of your spear, a simple but effective weapon that represents one of humanity's earliest technological achievements, though you have no conception that this tool places you at a crucial juncture in the story of human development, because to you it is simply a pointed stick that helps you kill animals and defend yourself against threats, and the complex engineering principles that make the spear effective, including leverage, momentum, and the concentration of force at a sharp point, remain completely mysterious to you, even though you use these principles with deadly accuracy every time you hunt. And the idea that these same physical laws govern everything from the movement of planets to the behavior of subatomic particles would seem like incomprehensible magic if anyone could somehow explain such concepts to your pre-literate mind. As the first grey light of dawn begins to seep into your shelter, you can finally see the faces of your family members sleeping around you, their features barely visible in the dim illumination but familiar enough that you can identify each person by the sound of their breathing or the particular way they shift in their sleep, and among them lies your youngest child, a daughter barely 3 years old whose survival through the harsh winter months represents a minor miracle that you attribute to the favor of invisible spirits that you believe control the forces of nature, though you have no understanding that her continued health depends on complex biological processes, including her developing immune system's ability to fight off bacterial and viral infections that could easily kill her if her body's natural defenses were compromised by malnutrition or exposure to environmental stresses that exceed her physiological capacity to adapt and recover. The child stirs as the growing light reaches her closed eyelids, and you watch with the fierce protective love that has driven human behavior since the species first emerged, though you cannot comprehend that this powerful emotional attachment serves crucial evolutionary functions by ensuring that adults will invest enormous amounts of time and energy in caring for offspring whose brains require nearly 2 decades to fully mature, making human children more dependent on parental care for longer periods than any other species on Earth, and the complex neurochemical processes that create parental bonding, including the release of hormones like oxytocin and dopamine, operate entirely below your conscious awareness, even though they control many of your most important decisions and behaviors. Your mate awakens beside you, her eyes opening slowly as she emerges from sleep, and the look that passes between you communicates volumes of shared experience and mutual dependence that needs no words, though your species has only recently developed the capacity for complex vocal communication, and your vocabulary consists of perhaps a few hundred words and gestures that allow for basic coordination of group activities but cannot express abstract concepts or detailed descriptions of internal mental states and the sophisticated grammatical structures that will eventually allow humans to transmit complex cultural knowledge across generations remain thousands of years in the future, leaving you trapped in an eternal present where most learning must be accomplished through direct observation and imitation rather than through the detailed verbal instruction that will eventually accelerate human cultural development at an exponential rate. The stirring of your family members triggers your body's automatic response to the approaching day, and you feel the familiar surge of alertness that comes as your brain releases chemicals designed to prepare you for the challenges ahead, though you have no understanding of how your circadian rhythms synchronize your internal biological processes with the cycle of daylight and darkness, or how the specialized cells in your eyes detect changes in light levels and send signals to your brain that trigger the release of hormones that regulate your sleep-wake cycle, your body temperature, and your digestive processes. And the idea that these same mechanisms will someday allow humans to adapt to artificial lighting and shift work schedules that completely disrupt natural biological rhythms remains far beyond your capacity to imagine. As you rise to your feet and stretch your muscles to relieve the stiffness that accumulates during sleep, you automatically scan your environment for any changes that might have occurred during the night, looking for signs of predators or competitors who might have approached your shelter, checking the weather conditions to determine what activities will be possible during the day, and assessing the health and mood of your family members to identify any problems that need immediate attention. Though this complex process of environmental monitoring operates largely through unconscious pattern recognition that your brain performs automatically based on millions of years of evolutionary programming that has optimized human sensory systems for detecting threats and opportunities in natural environments, and you remain completely unaware of how your brain processes visual information by breaking it down into basic elements like edges, colors, and movements before reassembling these components into coherent perceptions that allow you to navigate through a three-dimensional world. The sounds of awakening life begin to reach your ears as other members of your extended family group emerge from their own shelters scattered throughout the small valley that your people have occupied for several seasons, and you can distinguish between the voices of different individuals even at considerable distances because your auditory system has been finely tuned by evolution to recognize the subtle acoustic signatures that make each human voice unique, though you have no understanding of how sound waves propagate through air molecules or how your ears convert mechanical vibrations into electrical signals that your brain interprets as meaningful sounds. And the complex mathematics that govern acoustics and allow engineers to design concert halls and audio equipment with precise sound characteristics remain completely outside your conceptual framework. Your stomach contracts with hunger, reminding you that the previous day's hunt yielded insufficient food for your family, and you begin to consider the options available for finding enough calories to sustain yourself and your dependents through another day, though your understanding of nutrition extends only to the basic recognition that some foods provide more energy than others and that meat generally satisfies hunger better than plant materials, and you have no conception of proteins, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, or minerals, or how these different nutrients serve specific functions in maintaining your body's health and supporting the complex biochemical processes that keep you alive. And the idea that certain combinations of foods can provide complete nutrition while others may lead to deficiency diseases remains far beyond your knowledge. The decision about where to search for food requires you to consider multiple factors, including the weather conditions, the seasonal availability of different resources, the movements of animal herds, and the territories claimed by neighboring groups who might react violently to any perceived intrusion, though your decision-making process operates primarily through intuition and pattern recognition rather than the systematic analysis that characterizes modern problem-solving approaches, and you have no understanding of probability theory, statistical analysis, or decision trees that could help you optimize your choices and maximize your chances of success while minimizing risks. And the mathematical tools that will eventually allow humans to model complex systems and predict outcomes with reasonable accuracy remain thousands of years in the future. Your knowledge of animal behavior comes entirely from direct observation accumulated over years of hunting and gathering, and while this experimental learning has given you remarkably accurate insights into the habits and preferences of the creatures that share your environment, you have no understanding of the evolutionary pressures that shape these behaviors or the genetic mechanisms that transmit behavioral patterns from one generation to the next, and the concept that all living things are related through common ancestry and that their characteristics result from millions of years of gradual change in response to environmental challenges would seem utterly incomprehensible to your mind, which tends to view each species as a separate and unchanging creation with fixed characteristics that have always existed in their current form. As you prepare to leave your shelter and begin the day's search for food, you automatically check the sky for weather signs, noting the color and movement of clouds, the direction and strength of the wind, and the quality of light that filters through the atmosphere. And while your predictions about short-term weather changes are often remarkably accurate, you have no understanding of the global atmospheric circulation patterns that drive weather systems, or how solar radiation, ocean currents, and the rotation of the Earth interact to create the complex climate phenomena that determine whether you will face sunshine, rain, snow, or storms during the coming hours. And the meteorological knowledge that will eventually allow humans to forecast weather conditions days or weeks in advance remains completely outside your mental framework. Your family begins to stir more actively as the dawn light grows stronger, and you watch your older children automatically begin their morning routines of checking their personal possessions, organizing their tools and weapons, and preparing for whatever activities the day might bring, and you feel a deep satisfaction in observing how well they have learned the survival skills that you have taught them through demonstration and practice, though you have no understanding of how human learning differs from that of other animals, or how the enlarged prefrontal cortex that characterizes modern human brains allows for abstract reasoning, long-term planning, and the transmission of complex cultural knowledge that accumulates across generations and drives the exponential growth of human technological capabilities. The first major decision of each day involves choosing between several different strategies for obtaining food, and as you consider the possibilities, you weigh factors like the energy expenditure required for different activities against the probable yield of calories that each approach might provide, though this cost-benefit analysis operates entirely through unconscious pattern matching rather than explicit mathematical calculation, and you have no understanding of concepts like efficiency, optimization, or resource allocation that will eventually become central to economic theory and business management, and the sophisticated analytical tools that modern humans use to make complex decisions involving multiple variables and uncertain outcomes remain far beyond your intellectual capabilities. Your oldest son approaches you with a question about spearmaking that requires you to demonstrate the proper technique for hafting a stone point to a wooden shaft, and as you show him how to bind the components together using sinew and tree resin, you automatically adjust your teaching method to match his current skill level and learning style, though you have no conscious understanding of pedagogy or the cognitive processes that enable knowledge transfer between individuals and the educational theories that will eventually revolutionize human learning by identifying optimal methods for different types of skills and different stages of mental development remain thousands of years in the future, leaving you to rely entirely on intuitive approaches that nevertheless prove remarkably effective for transmitting practical survival knowledge. The complexity of even the simplest toolmaking requires your brain to coordinate visual perception, fine motor control, spatial reasoning, and procedural memory in ways that involve millions of neural connections operating in precise synchronization, though you experience this only as the familiar feeling of skilled craftsmanship that comes from years of practice, and you have no awareness of how your nervous system manages the intricate timing and coordination required for complex manual tasks, or how repeated practice creates permanent changes in brain structure that encode procedural knowledge and make skilled movements increasingly automatic and efficient, and the neuroscientific understanding that will eventually reveal how learning physically restructures the brain remains completely outside your conceptual framework. As your family group begins to disperse for the day's activities, you notice subtle changes in the behavior and posture of various individuals that provide important information about their physical health, emotional state, and social relationships, and while you unconsciously process this nonverbal communication with remarkable accuracy, you have no understanding of how facial expressions, body language, and vocal tones serve as channels for transmitting complex social information, or how the human brain has evolved specialized circuits for detecting and interpreting subtle social cues that help maintain group cohesion and coordinate collective activities, and the psychological theories that will eventually explain how humans navigate complex social environments through unconscious behavioral signaling remain far beyond your capacity to comprehend. Your decision to join a small hunting party rather than foraging individually reflects your intuitive understanding that cooperative strategies often yield better results than individual efforts, especially when pursuing large game animals that can provide enough meat to feed multiple families for several days, though you have no explicit knowledge of game theory, group dynamics, or the mathematical principles that determine when cooperation provides greater benefits than competition, and the economic models that will eventually quantify the advantages of specialization and trade remain completely outside your mental framework, leaving you to rely on evolutionary programming that automatically guides you toward collaborative behaviors that enhance group survival. The hunting party consists of 4 adult males whose skills complement each other in ways that maximize the group's effectiveness, with each individual contributing specialized abilities in tracking, weapon use, animal behavior prediction, and tactical coordination, though this natural division of labor emerges entirely through informal social processes rather than explicit planning or role assignment. And you have no understanding of how human societies naturally develop organizational structures that optimize the use of individual talents and resources, or how the principles of comparative advantage and specialization will eventually drive the development of complex economic systems that allow for unprecedented levels of productivity and technological advancement. As the hunting party moves through the landscape, your senses remain constantly alert for any signs of prey animals, and you automatically process vast amounts of environmental information including tracks, scents, disturbed vegetation, and behavioral patterns of birds and insects that might indicate the presence of larger animals in the vicinity, though this complex pattern recognition operates entirely through unconscious neural processes that have been optimized by millions of years of evolution. And you have no awareness of how your brain filters and analyzes sensory input to extract meaningful information from the overwhelming flood of data that constantly bombards your nervous system, or how attention and perception work together to create your conscious experience of the world around you. The trail that your group follows winds through terrain that would challenge even experienced modern hikers, requiring you to navigate steep slopes, dense vegetation, and unstable footing while maintaining the stealth and alertness necessary for successful hunting. And while your physical conditioning and balance allow you to move through this environment with remarkable grace and efficiency, you have no understanding of the biomechanical principles that govern human locomotion, or how your musculoskeletal system coordinates complex movements through the integration of sensory feedback, motor planning, and automatic reflexes that operate faster than conscious thought. And the sports science knowledge that will eventually optimize human athletic performance through detailed analysis of movement mechanics remains thousands of years in the future. Your tracking skills allow you to read the landscape like a book, interpreting subtle signs that reveal the recent passage of various animals, their direction of travel, their physical condition, and their probable destinations. And while this knowledge comes from years of careful observation and practice, you have no understanding of the scientific method or systematic approaches to data collection and hypothesis testing that could accelerate the acquisition of such knowledge, and the research methodologies that will eventually allow humans to unlock the secrets of natural phenomena through controlled experimentation remain completely outside your conceptual framework, leaving you to rely on trial and error learning that operates across decades rather than years. The cooperative dynamics within your hunting party emerge naturally from years of shared experience and mutual trust, with each member automatically adjusting his behavior to support the group's objectives while maintaining awareness of potential conflicts or misunderstandings that could compromise the mission's success, though these complex social calculations operate entirely through unconscious emotional intelligence rather than explicit negotiation or formal agreements, and you have no understanding of organizational psychology or the management techniques that will eventually allow human societies to coordinate the activities of thousands or millions of individuals working toward common goals. And the leadership theories that will optimize group performance through systematic analysis of motivation, communication, and decision-making processes remain far beyond your intellectual horizon. As the morning progresses and your hunting party follows increasingly fresh signs of prey, you begin to experience the familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety that accompanies the approach of potential danger and opportunity. And while these emotional responses serve crucial functions in preparing your body and mind for the challenges ahead, you have no understanding of how your endocrine system releases hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that alter your physiology in ways that enhance your performance during stressful situations, or how the sympathetic nervous system coordinates changes in heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, and sensory acuity that optimize your capacity for fight or flight responses. And the medical knowledge that will eventually reveal the intricate connections between mind and body remains completely outside your awareness. The prey animal that your group has been tracking finally comes into view as a large deer feeding in a small clearing, and the sight triggers an immediate shift in your group's behavior as each hunter automatically moves into position according to a tactical plan that has never been explicitly discussed but emerges naturally from shared understanding of terrain, wind direction, animal behavior, and individual capabilities, though this coordinated response reflects unconscious pattern matching rather than strategic thinking, and you have no understanding of military tactics, operational planning, or the systematic approaches to problem solving that will eventually allow human organizations to manage complex projects involving multiple participants and changing conditions over extended periods of time. Your heart rate increases as you prepare to throw your spear, and your entire being focuses on the critical moment when success or failure will be determined by the accuracy of your aim and the power of your throw, though you have no understanding of the physics principles that govern projectile motion, including gravity, air resistance, and the transfer of momentum from your muscles through the spear to the target, and the mathematical equations that describe these phenomena with perfect precision remain thousands of years beyond human discovery, leaving you to rely entirely on intuitive understanding developed through countless hours of practice and the automatic motor programs that your nervous system has perfected through repetition. The spear leaves your hand with the familiar feel of a well-executed throw, and time seems to slow as you watch its flight toward the deer, though this subjective experience of altered time perception reflects neurological processes that allow your brain to process information more efficiently during critical moments, and you have no understanding of how consciousness works or how the brain creates the subjective sense of time that can stretch or compress depending on circumstances, or how attention and emotion interact to influence your perception of temporal flow, and the neuroscientific theories that will eventually explain these phenomena through detailed analysis of brain activity remain completely beyond your conceptual reach. The spear strikes its target with satisfying force, and the deer stumbles and falls as your hunting party emerges from concealment to secure the kill, and while you feel intense satisfaction at the successful conclusion of the hunt, you have no understanding of how the neurochemical reward systems that evolve to reinforce survival-related behaviors operate through the release of dopamine and other neurotransmitters that create feelings of pleasure and accomplishment, or how these same mechanisms will eventually be exploited by technologies and substances that provide artificial stimulation of reward pathways and can lead to addiction and other behavioral problems that compromise human well-being. The process of butchering the deer requires specialized knowledge about anatomy, tool use, and food preservation that has been passed down through generations of hunters, and as you work with practiced efficiency to separate meat from bone and prepare the various parts for transport and storage, you demonstrate remarkable understanding of practical biology even though you have no conception of formal scientific categories like anatomy, physiology, or taxonomy, and the systematic approaches to biological classification and analysis that will eventually organize human knowledge about living systems remain far beyond your intellectual capabilities, leaving you to work with intuitive understanding that is nevertheless highly effective for practical purposes. Your group's return to the family encampment with fresh meat creates immediate excitement and activity as women and children gather to participate in the food preparation and distribution process, and the complex social negotiations that determine how the meat will be shared reflect sophisticated understanding of reciprocity, obligation, and status relationships within your group, though these social dynamics operate through emotional intelligence and cultural intuition rather than explicit rules or formal institutions, and you have no understanding of political science, economics, or sociology, or the systematic approaches to social organization that will eventually allow human societies to manage resources and resolve conflicts among much larger populations through formal legal and governmental systems. The celebration that accompanies a successful hunt serves important functions in maintaining group morale and reinforcing social bonds, though you experience this only as natural joy and fellowship rather than understanding the psychological mechanisms that make communal activities essential for human mental health and social cohesion, and you have no conception of how music, dance, storytelling, and shared meals stimulate the release of hormones and neurotransmitters that create feelings of belonging and mutual trust, or how these same social technologies will eventually be used to build large-scale civilizations that depend on cooperation among millions of strangers who share common cultural identities and values. As evening approaches and your family settles around the fire that provides warmth, light, and protection from predators, you watch the flames with the same fascination that has captivated humans since your ancestors first learned to control this powerful natural force, though you have no understanding of the chemical combustion process that converts organic molecules into heat and light through rapid oxidation, or how fire transforms the molecular structure of food in ways that make nutrients more accessible and eliminate harmful bacteria and parasites, and the scientific knowledge that will eventually reveal fire's role in human evolution and cultural development remains completely outside your awareness, leaving you to regard fire as a mysterious but controllable force that serves essential functions in daily survival. The stories that older members of your group share around the evening fire serve crucial functions in transmitting cultural knowledge, reinforcing social values, and providing entertainment that helps pass the long hours of darkness, though you have no understanding of how oral traditions preserve and transmit information across generations in the absence of written language, or how narrative structures help organize knowledge in memorable forms that can survive the inevitable distortions and embellishments that occur during repeated telling, and the anthropological theories that will eventually explain how human culture evolves through the accumulation and transmission of symbolic knowledge remain far beyond your conceptual reach, leaving you to participate in these ancient practices without recognizing their fundamental importance for human cultural development. Your youngest child falls asleep in your arms as the fire burns low, and you feel the profound contentment that comes from successful completion of another day's survival challenges, though you have no understanding of how parental behaviors and family structures serve evolutionary functions by ensuring the survival and development of offspring who carry genetic information into future generations, or how the emotional bonds that connect family members create the foundation for all larger social institutions and cultural achievements, and the biological and psychological theories that will eventually explain human behavior in terms of evolutionary adaptation and genetic programming remain thousands of years beyond human discovery, leaving you to experience these powerful forces as natural and unquestionable aspects of existence. As you prepare for sleep in your shelter surrounded by family members whose breathing creates a comforting rhythm in the darkness, you feel the satisfying tiredness that comes from physical exertion and meaningful accomplishment, though you have no understanding of how sleep serves essential functions in memory consolidation, physical recovery, and mental health, or how the brain uses periods of unconsciousness to process the day's experiences and prepare for future challenges, and the sleep research that will eventually reveal the complex stages of rest and their specific contributions to human well-being remains completely outside your knowledge, leaving you to trust in the natural rhythms that guide your body through cycles of activity and rest that have sustained your species through millions of years of evolution. The stars that shine through gaps in your shelter's roof provide familiar landmarks that help you maintain orientation and track the passage of seasons, though you have no understanding that these distant points of light are actually massive nuclear fusion reactors separated from Earth by distances so vast that their light takes years to reach your eyes, or how the apparent movements of celestial objects result from Earth's rotation and orbital motion through space, and the astronomical knowledge that will eventually reveal humanity's place in a universe containing billions of galaxies remains so far beyond your conceptual framework that such ideas would seem like incomprehensible magic if anyone could somehow communicate them to your pre-literate mind. Your thoughts as you drift towards sleep focus on practical concerns like tomorrow's weather, the location of game animals, and the needs of your family members, though you have no awareness of how consciousness emerges from the complex interactions of billions of brain cells, or how the subjective experience of thinking and feeling arises from electrochemical processes that operate according to physical laws, and the philosophical and scientific questions about the nature of mind and its relationship to matter remain completely outside your intellectual horizon, leaving you to accept consciousness as a natural and unexamined aspect of existence that requires no explanation beyond its immediate utility for survival and social interaction. The rhythmic breathing of your sleeping family creates a peaceful atmosphere that gradually lulls you toward unconsciousness, and as your thoughts become increasingly fragmented and dreamlike, you have no understanding of how the brain transitions between different states of consciousness or how dreams serve functions in memory processing and emotional regulation, though you may occasionally experience dreams that seem to provide guidance or warnings about future events, and you have no conception of how random neural activity during sleep can create vivid experiences that feel completely real despite having no connection to external reality, and the neurological research that will eventually map the brain's activity during different sleep stages remains thousands of years in the future, leaving you to interpret dreams as messages from spiritual forces rather than understanding them as natural products of brain physiology. Your final conscious thoughts of the day involve gratitude for surviving another 24 hours in a world full of dangers and uncertainties, though you have no understanding of probability theory or statistical analysis that could help you quantify the actual risks you face or develop systematic approaches to risk management, and you have no conception of insurance planning or the other financial and social technologies that will eventually allow humans to cope with uncertainty through collective risk sharing and long-term resource allocation, and the economic theories that will optimize human welfare through systematic analysis of scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost remain completely outside your mental framework. leaving you to rely on day-to-day adaptation and the wisdom accumulated through direct experience across generations of ancestors who faced similar challenges and gradually developed the cultural practices that enable your survival. Sleep finally claims your consciousness as your brain transitions into the restorative processes that will prepare you for another day of challenges and opportunities, and in your dreams you may experience fragmented memories of the day's hunt, distorted images of family members and animals, or fantastic scenarios that bear little resemblance to waking reality, though you have no understanding of how dreaming reflects the brain's attempts to process and integrate new information with existing knowledge structures, or how the random firing of neurons during REM sleep can create experiences that feel meaningful and significant despite their lack of logical coherence, and the psychological research that will eventually reveal how dreams contribute to learning, memory, and emotional well-being remains far beyond your capacity to imagine, leaving you to wake each morning with only fragmentary recollections of nocturnal experiences that seem to come from sources outside your normal consciousness. Morning arrives again with the familiar cycle of awakening, assessment, and preparation that structures each day of your existence, though you have no understanding of how circadian rhythms synchronize your internal biological processes with the solar cycle, or how the gradual evolution of Earth's rotation and orbital characteristics has shaped the fundamental patterns of life on your planet, and you have no conception of geological time scales that span millions or billions of years, or how the physical and chemical processes that created your environment operate according to natural laws that govern everything from atomic interactions to galactic formation. And the scientific knowledge that will eventually reveal the deep history of matter and energy remains so far beyond your intellectual reach that such concepts would be utterly incomprehensible to your mind, which focuses entirely on immediate practical concerns and short-term temporal horizons that extend no further than seasonal cycles and generational memory. Days blend into weeks and seasons as your life follows the ancient rhythms that have sustained human society since the species first emerged, and while each day brings new challenges and opportunities that require constant adaptation and learning, you have no understanding of how human culture evolves through the accumulation of small innovations and the gradual transmission of knowledge across generations, or how the principles of variation, selection, and inheritance that drive biological evolution also operate in cultural systems to produce increasingly sophisticated technologies and social institutions, and the theoretical frameworks that will eventually explain cultural change as an evolutionary process remain thousands of years beyond human discovery, leaving you to participate in this grand historical transformation without recognizing your role as both product and agent of the forces that will eventually create civilization and transform the relationship between humanity and the natural world in ways that you could never imagine from your current perspective as a member of a small hunter-gatherer band struggling to survive in an environment that demands constant vigilance and adaptation. Years pass in the endless cycle of survival activities that define your existence, and as you age and gain experience, you gradually accumulate practical knowledge about your environment and develop increasingly sophisticated skills in hunting, toolmaking, and social cooperation, though you have no understanding of how learning and development occur throughout the human lifespan, or how the brain's plasticity allows for continuous adaptation to new challenges and opportunities, and you have no conception of how education and training could be systematized to accelerate the acquisition of knowledge and skills, and the pedagogical theories that will eventually optimize human learning through systematic analysis of cognitive development remain completely outside your awareness, leaving you to rely on trial and error approaches and informal mentorship that nevertheless prove remarkably effective for transmitting the cultural knowledge necessary for survival in your particular environment. Your children grow and develop their own competencies, and as you watch them master the skills that you have taught them and begin to contribute meaningfully to the family's survival efforts, you feel the deep satisfaction that comes from successful reproduction and cultural transmission, though you have no understanding of how parental investment strategies have been shaped by evolutionary pressures, or how the extended period of human childhood development allows for the transmission of complex cultural knowledge that gives your species unique advantages over other animals, and the anthropological theories that will eventually explain human family structures and child-rearing practices in terms of evolutionary adaptation remain far beyond your conceptual reach, leaving you to experience these powerful drives as natural and unquestionable aspects of existence that require no explanation beyond their immediate emotional significance. As your hair begins to gray and your physical strength gradually diminishes, you transition naturally into the role of elder and advisor whose accumulated wisdom becomes increasingly valuable to younger members of your group, though you have no understanding of how aging affects brain function and cognitive capabilities, or how the knowledge and experience that older individuals possess serves crucial functions in maintaining cultural continuity and providing guidance during crisis situations, and you have no conception of how human societies develop institutions and practices that preserve and transmit the wisdom of elders across generations, and the gerontological research that will eventually reveal the complex relationships between aging, cognition, and social contribution remains thousands of years in the future, leaving you to age gracefully according to natural patterns that maximize your contribution to group survival while accepting the inevitable decline in physical capabilities that accompanies the passage of time. The changing seasons bring their familiar cycles of abundance and scarcity, and your group's survival depends on your collective ability to anticipate and prepare for these predictable variations in resource availability, though you have no understanding of the complex climatic and ecological processes that drive seasonal changes, or how astronomical cycles influence weather patterns and biological rhythms, and you have no conception of how climate systems operate on global scales, or how human activities might eventually alter these fundamental patterns, and the environmental science that will eventually reveal the intricate connections between atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, and geosphere remains completely outside your knowledge, leaving you to work with intuitive understanding of local patterns while remaining unaware of the larger systems that control your environment and determine the long-term viability of your habitat and way of life. Your group occasionally encounters other human bands, and these meetings require careful navigation of complex social dynamics that could result in either beneficial cooperation or dangerous conflict, though you have no understanding of the game theory principles that govern strategic interactions between groups with potentially competing interests, or how communication, reputation, and reciprocity can be used to build trust and facilitate cooperation even among strangers, and you have no conception of how larger social institutions like trade networks, alliances, and legal systems will eventually allow human societies to coordinate activities across vast geographic areas and among enormous populations. And the political science theories that will optimize collective decision-making and conflict resolution remain far beyond your intellectual capabilities, leaving you to rely on evolutionary programming and cultural intuition to guide your responses to intergroup encounters that could determine your family's fate for generations to come. The technological innovations that your group develops and adopts emerge gradually through individual creativity and collective experimentation, though you have no understanding of how innovation occurs or how new technologies spread through populations, and you have no conception of intellectual property research and development, or the systematic approaches to technological advancement that will eventually accelerate human progress at exponential rates, and the economic theories that will explain how innovation drives productivity growth and improves living standards remain thousands of years beyond human discovery, leaving you to participate in the slow accumulation of technological knowledge through direct participation in trial and error processes that operate across generations and produce gradual improvements in tools, techniques, and social practices that enhance your group's survival capabilities and quality of life. The injuries and illnesses that inevitably affect members of your group must be treated using traditional remedies and care practices that have been developed through generations of experimentation, though you have no understanding of anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, or the biological mechanisms that cause disease and healing, and you have no conception of germs, viruses, or the immune system, and the medical knowledge that will eventually allow humans to prevent and cure most infectious diseases remains completely outside your awareness, leaving you to work with herbal remedies, physical manipulation, and spiritual practices that sometimes prove effective for reasons that you cannot comprehend and that often fail to save people who could easily be treated using modern medical interventions. The death of family members and friends creates profound grief and social disruption that must be managed through cultural practices and spiritual beliefs that help your group maintain coherence and functionality despite the loss of valued individuals, though you have no understanding of psychology, grief counseling, or the therapeutic interventions that will eventually help humans cope more effectively with trauma and loss, and you have no conception of how religious and spiritual beliefs serve psychological functions by providing meaning, comfort, and social support during difficult times, and the sociological theories that will explain how human societies develop institutions and practices that promote mental health and social stability remain far beyond your capacity to imagine, leaving you to rely on traditional practices and community support systems that have evolved through cultural trial and error over many generations. Your understanding of the natural world operates entirely through direct observation and practical experience, though you have no understanding of the scientific method or systematic approaches to hypothesis testing that could accelerate the acquisition of reliable knowledge about natural phenomena, and you have no conception of controlled experiments, statistical analysis, or peer review processes that will eventually allow human societies to build cumulative knowledge bases that transcend individual experience and cultural limitations, and the philosophical foundations of empirical science remain thousands of years beyond human development, leaving you to work with intuitive theories and traditional explanations that sometimes capture important truths about natural patterns but often include supernatural elements and logical inconsistencies that prevent systematic understanding of causation and natural laws. The spiritual beliefs that guide your group's understanding of natural and social phenomena provide psychological comfort and social cohesion, though you have no understanding of how religious concepts emerge from human cognitive tendencies and social needs, or how spiritual practices serve psychological and social functions that promote individual well-being and group cooperation, and you have no conception of comparative religion theology, or the scholarly approaches to understanding religious phenomena that will eventually allow humans to analyze spiritual beliefs and practices from historical and cross-cultural perspectives, and the anthropological theories that will explain religion as a universal human phenomenon with adaptive functions remain completely outside your conceptual framework, leaving you to participate in spiritual practices as natural and necessary aspects of existence that require no explanation beyond their immediate emotional and social significance. The territorial boundaries that your group recognizes and defends emerge from practical necessity and historical precedent rather than formal legal agreements, though you have no understanding of property rights, sovereignty, or the legal institutions that will eventually allow human societies to establish and enforce complex systems of ownership and territorial control. And you have no conception of how geographic boundaries and resource allocation systems could be optimized through systematic analysis of population density, resource distribution, and environmental carrying capacity, and the legal and economic theories that will govern land use and territorial disputes remain far beyond human development, leaving you to rely on traditional practices and informal negotiations that sometimes prevent conflicts but often lead to violence when competing groups encounter resource scarcity or territorial disputes that cannot be resolved through existing cultural mechanisms. The languages that you and your people speak consist of relatively simple vocabularies and grammatical structures that allow for basic communication about immediate practical concerns but cannot express abstract concepts, complex logical relationships, or detailed descriptions of hypothetical situations, though you have no understanding of linguistics, syntax, or the cognitive processes that enable human language acquisition and use, and you have no conception of how languages evolve over time or how written systems will eventually allow for the preservation and transmission of complex information across vast distances and time periods. And the theoretical frameworks that will explain language as a uniquely human capacity that enables cumulative cultural evolution remain thousands of years beyond human discovery, leaving you to communicate using the limited linguistic tools available to your generation while remaining unaware of the revolutionary potential that lies dormant in your species' capacity for symbolic expression and abstract thought. The mathematical concepts that govern your daily life operate entirely below your conscious awareness, though your brain automatically processes spatial relationships, quantities, proportions, and temporal patterns with remarkable accuracy, and you have no understanding of how numerical thinking emerges from basic cognitive capacities or how mathematical systems could be formalized and extended to solve complex problems, and you have no conception of arithmetic, geometry, algebra, or the advanced mathematical tools that will eventually allow humans to model natural phenomena with extraordinary precision and develop technologies that seem impossible from your current perspective, and the mathematical knowledge that will unlock the secrets of physics, chemistry, and engineering remains completely outside your intellectual horizon, leaving you to work with intuitive quantitative reasoning that serves immediate practical needs but cannot be systematized or transmitted in forms that would allow for rapid accumulation of computational knowledge across generations. The economic relationships within your group emerge naturally from kinship ties, reciprocal obligations, and informal social contracts that govern resource sharing and labor coordination, though you have no understanding of markets, currency, or the exchange mechanisms that will eventually allow human societies to coordinate economic activities among millions of individuals with diverse skills and preferences. And you have no conception of supply and demand, price systems, or the economic institutions that will optimize resource allocation through decentralized decision-making processes, and the economic theories that will explain how market systems can achieve efficient outcomes without central planning remain far beyond human development, leaving you to participate in primitive economic relationships that depend entirely on personal trust and social pressure rather than formal mechanisms for ensuring fair exchange and contract enforcement. The environmental changes that occur around you throughout your lifetime reflect natural processes and cycles that operate according to physical and biological laws, though you have no understanding of ecology, evolution, or the complex interactions between living organisms and their physical environment, and you have no conception of how human activities might alter natural systems or how technological development could eventually give your species the power to modify entire ecosystems and planetary processes, and the environmental science that will reveal humanity's growing impact on Earth's climate, biodiversity, and geological systems remains thousands of years in the future, leaving you to live within natural cycles without recognizing your participation in ecological relationships that connect your survival to the health of countless other species and environmental processes that operate at scales far beyond your immediate awareness or control. Your group's social organization reflects evolutionary programming and cultural traditions that have developed over generations of trial and error, though you have no understanding of sociology, anthropology, or the systematic approaches to analyzing social institutions that will eventually allow human societies to design and implement more effective forms of governance, education, and social coordination, and you have no conception of how social systems could be optimized through careful analysis of human psychology, group dynamics, and organizational behavior, and the social science theories that will explain how institutions emerge and evolve remain completely outside your conceptual framework, leaving you to participate in social relationships according to instinctive patterns and traditional practices that sometimes promote cooperation and well-being but often create conflicts and inefficiencies that could be avoided through more systematic approaches to social organization. The healing practices that your group uses to treat injuries and illnesses combine practical techniques with spiritual beliefs and social rituals, though you have no understanding of the placebo effect, psychosomatic medicine, or the complex relationships between mind and body that influence health outcomes, and you have no conception of how psychological factors can affect physical healing or how social support and cultural beliefs contribute to recovery from trauma and disease, and the medical knowledge that will eventually integrate physical and psychological approaches to healthcare remains far beyond your capacity to imagine, leaving you to work with traditional healing methods that sometimes prove effective for reasons that you cannot understand and that depend as much on social and psychological factors as on the direct physical effects of herbal remedies and manual therapies. The stories and myths that your people tell around evening fires serve important functions in transmitting cultural values, historical knowledge, and practical wisdom across generations, though you have no understanding of how narrative structures organize information in memorable forms or how symbolic thinking allows humans to encode complex concepts in story form, and you have no conception of literature, mythology, or the scholarly approaches to analyzing cultural narratives that will eventually reveal how human societies use storytelling to maintain social cohesion and transmit cultural knowledge, and the anthropological theories that will explain oral traditions as sophisticated information storage and transmission systems remain thousands of years beyond human development, leaving you to participate in these ancient practices without recognizing their crucial role in cultural evolution and the preservation of collective wisdom that enables your group's survival and adaptation to changing circumstances. The artistic expressions that your people create through cave paintings, decorative objects, and ritual performances emerge from deep human needs for beauty, meaning, and symbolic communication, though you have no understanding of aesthetics, semiotics, or the cognitive processes that enable artistic creativity and appreciation, and you have no conception of how art serves psychological and social functions by providing outlets for emotional expression, creating shared cultural symbols, and facilitating group bonding through collaborative creative activities, and the theoretical frameworks that will explain artistic behavior as a fundamental human capacity with evolutionary origins remain completely outside your awareness, leaving you to create and appreciate art according to intuitive impulses and cultural traditions that feel natural and necessary but whose deeper significance and adaptive functions remain hidden from conscious understanding. The leadership patterns that emerge within your group reflect a complex mixture of personal charisma, practical competence, age-related wisdom, and social negotiation, though you have no understanding of leadership theory, organizational psychology, or the systematic approaches to developing and evaluating leadership capabilities that will eventually allow human societies to select and train leaders more effectively, and you have no conception of how different leadership styles might be optimal for different situations, or how leadership effectiveness depends on the interaction between individual characteristics and group needs, and the management science that will optimize organizational performance through systematic analysis of leadership motivation and decision-making processes remains far beyond human development, leaving you to follow leaders based on instinctive judgments and cultural traditions that sometimes result in effective governance but often lead to conflicts and poor decisions that could be avoided through more systematic approaches to leadership selection and development. The conflicts that occasionally arise within your group or between your group and others must be resolved through traditional mechanisms that rely on personal relationships, status hierarchies, and informal mediation rather than formal legal processes, though you have no understanding of conflict resolution theory, negotiation strategies, or the institutional approaches to dispute settlement that will eventually allow human societies to manage conflicts more effectively and prevent escalation to violence, and you have no conception of how legal systems could provide predictable and fair mechanisms for resolving disputes while protecting individual rights and promoting social stability. And the jurisprudential theories that will govern legal institutions remain thousands of years beyond human discovery, leaving you to resolve conflicts through methods that depend entirely on personal wisdom and social pressure rather than systematic approaches to justice and dispute resolution. The technological innovations that occasionally emerge within your group or are adopted from contact with other people spread slowly through demonstration and imitation rather than systematic documentation and instruction, though you have no understanding of how knowledge transfer occurs or how technological diffusion could be accelerated through formal educational institutions and communication systems, and you have no conception of how innovation networks and research communities will eventually allow human societies to coordinate technological development across vast geographic areas and among thousands of specialized researchers. And the innovation theories that will explain how technological progress occurs through systematic research and development remain completely outside your conceptual framework, leaving you to participate in technological change through direct personal experience rather than understanding the systematic processes that will eventually accelerate human technological capabilities at exponential rates. The seasonal migrations that your group undertakes to follow animal herds and find seasonal resources require sophisticated knowledge of geography, weather patterns, and resource distribution, though you have no understanding of cartography, meteorology, or the systematic approaches to navigation and route planning that will eventually allow humans to travel safely across vast distances and explore unknown territories. And you have no conception of how geographic knowledge could be systematized and preserved in map form, or how navigation technologies could eliminate the risks and uncertainties that currently make long-distance travel extremely dangerous. And the geographic sciences that will enable systematic exploration and mapping of the entire planet remain far beyond your intellectual capabilities, leaving you to navigate according to traditional knowledge and direct observation while remaining vulnerable to the dangers and disorientation that result from inadequate navigation tools and techniques. The food preservation techniques that your people use to extend the usability of meat and plant materials reflect generations of experimentation with drying, smoking, and fermentation processes, though you have no understanding of the biochemical mechanisms that cause food spoilage or how different preservation methods work to prevent bacterial growth and chemical degradation, and you have no conception of how food science could be systematized to develop more effective preservation techniques, or how nutrition science could optimize food choices to prevent deficiency diseases and promote health, and the scientific knowledge that will revolutionize food production, processing, and distribution remains thousands of years in the future, leaving you to work with traditional methods that sometimes preserve food effectively but often result in spoilage and waste that could be prevented through more systematic approaches to food management. The childcare practices that your people use to raise healthy and capable offspring reflect evolutionary programming and cultural traditions that have been refined through generations of experience, though you have no understanding of child development, educational psychology, or the systematic approaches to parenting and education that will eventually optimize human learning and development. And you have no conception of how childhood experiences affect adult capabilities or how educational Interventions could be designed to maximize individual potential while promoting social cooperation and cultural continuity, and the developmental sciences that will explain how human beings grow and learn remain completely outside your awareness, leaving you to raise children according to instinctive patterns and traditional practices that sometimes produce excellent outcomes but often fail to realize the full potential of human cognitive and social capabilities. The death rituals that your people perform when members of the group die serve important psychological and social functions in helping survivors cope with loss and maintain group cohesion, though you have no understanding of grief psychology, thanatology, or the systematic approaches to death and dying that will eventually help human societies develop more effective ways of supporting bereaved individuals and managing the social disruption that accompanies mortality, and you have no conception of how cultural beliefs about death and afterlife serve psychological functions by providing meaning and comfort during times of loss, and the psychological theories that will explain death-related behaviors as adaptive responses to mortality awareness remain far beyond your capacity to imagine, leaving you to participate in death rituals according to traditional practices that feel emotionally necessary but whose deeper psychological and social functions remain hidden from conscious understanding. The tool-making techniques that your people use to create weapons, implements, and decorative objects require sophisticated understanding of materials science, engineering principles, and manufacturing processes, though you have no explicit knowledge of metallurgy, physics, or the systematic approaches to technological design that will eventually allow humans to create complex machines and instruments, and you have no conception of how material properties could be modified through chemical and physical treatments, or how engineering analysis could optimize tool design for specific functional requirements, and the technological sciences that will enable the development of advanced manufacturing techniques remain thousands of years beyond human discovery, leaving you to work with stone, wood, and organic materials using traditional methods that produce functional tools but cannot achieve the precision and capabilities that will become possible through more systematic approaches to material science and engineering design. The territorial knowledge that guides your group's movements and resource exploitation reflects detailed understanding of local geography, ecology, and seasonal patterns, though you have no understanding of systematic approaches to resource management, conservation biology, or the ecological principles that govern sustainable use of natural resources. And you have no conception of how human activities could be planned and coordinated to maintain ecological balance while meeting human needs over long time periods, and the environmental management theories that will enable sustainable development remain completely outside your conceptual framework, leaving you to use traditional practices that sometimes maintain ecological balance but often result in resource depletion and environmental degradation that could be prevented through more systematic approaches to conservation and resource planning. The social memories that your people maintain about past events, genealogies, and cultural traditions rely entirely on oral transmission and personal recollection, though you have no understanding of how memory works or how information storage and retrieval could be systematized through writing systems and external memory aids, and you have no conception of how historical knowledge could be preserved and organized to provide lessons for future decision-making, or how cultural information could be transmitted across generations without the distortions and losses that inevitably occur in oral traditions, and the information sciences that will revolutionize human knowledge storage and transmission remain far beyond your imagination, leaving you to work with limited and unreliable memory systems that cannot preserve complex cultural knowledge or transmit detailed information across long time periods. As your life progresses through the natural stages of growth, maturity, and aging, you gradually accumulate wisdom and experience that make you increasingly valuable to your group as an advisor and keeper of cultural knowledge, though you have no understanding of how aging affects cognitive function or how the knowledge and skills that older individuals possess could be systematically preserved and transmitted to younger generations, and you have no conception of how educational institutions could be designed to capture and transmit the accumulated wisdom of elders while continuing to innovate and adapt to changing circumstances. And the gerontological and educational theories that will optimize the use of human knowledge and experience across the lifespan remain thousands of years beyond human development, leaving you to age according to natural patterns while much of your accumulated wisdom dies with you rather than being preserved for future generations. The environmental challenges that your group faces throughout your lifetime, including droughts, floods, extreme weather, and resource scarcity, must be met through adaptive responses and traditional coping strategies, though you have no understanding of climate science, disaster preparedness, or the systematic approaches to risk management that will eventually allow human societies to anticipate and prepare for natural disasters. And you have no conception of how weather forecasting, early warning systems and emergency response planning could reduce the devastating impacts of environmental extremes, and the meteorological and emergency management sciences that will enable more effective responses to natural disasters remain completely outside your knowledge, leaving you to cope with environmental challenges through improvisation and traditional practices that sometimes prove adequate but often result in catastrophic losses that could be prevented through more systematic approaches to disaster preparedness and response. The intergroup relationships that your people maintain with neighboring bands involve complex negotiations over territory, resources, and social interactions, though you have no understanding of diplomacy, international relations, or the systematic approaches to conflict prevention and resolution that will eventually allow human societies to manage relationships among large numbers of independent groups. And you have no conception of how formal treaties, trade agreements, and international institutions could provide predictable frameworks for peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit, and the political sciences that will govern relationships between nations and peoples remain far beyond human development, leaving you to manage intergroup relations through informal negotiations and traditional practices that sometimes maintain peace but often lead to conflicts that could be avoided through more systematic approaches to diplomacy and international cooperation. The cultural innovations that occasionally emerge within your group or are learned from contact with others spread slowly through informal transmission and personal example rather than systematic documentation and instruction, though you have no understanding of how cultural evolution occurs or how innovation and diffusion could be accelerated through formal educational institutions and communication networks, and you have no conception of how research and development activities could be organized to promote systematic innovation and technological progress, and the theories of cultural evolution and innovation that will explain how human societies accumulate knowledge and capabilities remain thousands of years beyond human discovery, leaving you to participate in cultural change through direct personal experience rather than understanding the systematic processes that will eventually accelerate human cultural development at exponential rates. The spiritual experiences that you and your people occasionally have during rituals, dreams, or encounters with natural phenomena provide important sources of meaning and guidance, though you have no understanding of psychology of religion, consciousness studies, or the neurological basis of spiritual experiences, and you have no conception of how altered states of consciousness could be studied systematically or how spiritual practices serve psychological and social functions that promote individual well-being and group cohesion, and the scientific approaches to understanding religious and spiritual phenomena remain completely outside your awareness, leaving you to interpret spiritual experiences according to traditional beliefs and cultural frameworks that provide meaning and guidance but cannot distinguish between subjective psychological phenomena and objective external realities. The artistic traditions that your people maintain through decorative crafts, body painting, and ritual performances reflect deep human needs for aesthetic expression and symbolic communication, though you have no understanding of art history, aesthetic theory, or the systematic approaches to artistic education and criticism that will eventually allow human societies to develop sophisticated artistic traditions and preserve cultural heritage, and you have no conception of how artistic skills could be taught systematically or how artistic traditions could be documented and preserved for future generations, and the theories of art and aesthetics that will explain artistic behavior as a fundamental human capacity remain far beyond your conceptual reach, leaving you to create and appreciate art according to intuitive impulses and traditional practices that feel natural and meaningful but whose deeper significance and cultural functions remain hidden from systematic understanding. As you reach the final stages of your life and prepare to pass on your accumulated knowledge and wisdom to younger generations, you feel both satisfaction in your contributions to your family and group survival and sadness at the limitations that have constrained your understanding of the world and your ability to improve conditions for future generations, though you have no understanding of how human knowledge and capabilities will eventually expand through systematic scientific investigation and technological development, and you have no conception of how the basic survival challenges that have defined your entire existence will someday be solved through advances in medicine, agriculture, and social organization that will allow humans to live longer, healthier, and more prosperous lives. And the revolutionary changes that lie ahead for your species remain so far beyond your imagination that you cannot even dream of the possibilities that will emerge from the gradual accumulation of knowledge and the development of systematic approaches to understanding and controlling natural phenomena. Your death, when it comes, represents not only the end of your individual existence but also the loss of decades of accumulated experience and knowledge that could have benefited future generations if methods existed for preserving and transmitting such information systematically. Though you have no understanding of how human societies will eventually develop institutions and technologies that capture and preserve individual knowledge for collective benefit, and you have no conception of how the wisdom that dies with each generation could be preserved and built upon to accelerate human progress and improve life for all people, and the information systems that will eventually create permanent repositories of human knowledge remain thousands of years beyond your capacity to imagine, leaving your contributions to human understanding to die with you except for the limited fragments that can be transmitted through oral tradition and personal example to the small number of people whose lives you have directly touched. The seasonal cycles continue after your death, bringing the same challenges and opportunities that you faced throughout your lifetime to new generations who must learn the same basic survival skills and confront the same fundamental problems that have shaped human existence since the species first emerged, though they have no understanding of how human knowledge and capabilities could accumulate across generations through systematic preservation and transmission of cultural information, and they have no conception of how the repetitive cycles of learning and forgetting that characterize pre-literate societies could be broken through the development of writing systems and educational institutions that preserve knowledge permanently and make it available to all future generations, and the educational and information technologies that will eventually free humanity from the endless repetition of basic learning tasks remain completely outside their imagination, leaving them to begin again the slow process of accumulating practical knowledge through direct experience and traditional instruction that you and countless generations before you have followed in the eternal human struggle to understand and survive in a complex and challenging world that operates according to natural laws and systematic principles that remain hidden from conscious understanding but will someday be revealed through the patient application of scientific methods and systematic investigation that will transform humanity's relationship with nature and unlock possibilities for flourishing that you could never dream of from your current perspective as a member of a small hunter-gatherer band whose entire existence revolves around the immediate challenges of finding food, avoiding danger, and maintaining the social bonds that make survival possible in a world where knowledge dies with each individual and progress occurs at the glacial pace of biological and cultural evolution rather than through the exponential acceleration that will characterize human development once systematic approaches to knowledge preservation and transmission finally emerge from the long darkness of prehistory and launch humanity toward a future of unprecedented understanding, capability, and possibility that extends far beyond the basic survival concerns that have defined your entire existence and will continue to constrain human potential until the revolutionary developments in science, technology, and social organization that lie dormant in your species' future finally emerge to transform the human condition in ways that would seem like magic to your present understanding but will someday be recognized as the natural result of applying systematic thinking and scientific methods to the challenges and opportunities that surround you every day but remain invisible to minds that lack the conceptual tools and institutional support necessary for systematic investigation and cumulative learning.